Bonjour, nous allons...
Good morning. May I suggest that we get down to work and continue the work of this PC 26 meeting. Now, before we take up our agenda, I have two announcements to make. First of all, we have the sum documents for the first two sessions, PC 26 Sum 1 and PC 26 Sum 2. And you can find them on the CITES website. And we also have the .com documents that are the working group reports. Two of those are available now. Thank you. I would suggest that we resume our working program. We had got to the last item on Tuesday morning's program, item 39. This document was drafted by the Secretariat, and I would invite the Secretariat to introduce PC 26, Doc 39. You have the floor.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Bonjour. J'espère que vous avez...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I hope you had a nice visit to the botanical gardens, and thank you very much to the director of the garden if he is here.
Decisions 19266 and 19267 on an informal review mechanism for existing and proposed annotations. The Secretariat estimates that the cost of preparing a proposal on the feasibility and requirements for an informal mechanism, as mentioned in decision 19266, is about $30,000. And the Secretariat wishes to thank Switzerland, which has pledged the sum necessary for the implementation of that decision. Thank you. Based on the considerations outlined in document C74, document 82, the Secretariat is currently developing terms of reference for the development of the mentioned study. And the Secretariat will report the results of these terms of reference, the draft, to the 77 meeting of the Standing Committee, and would like to invite the Animals and Plants Committees to designate focal points for the consultation with the Standing Committee on the outcomes of that proposal of terms of reference. In closing, Madam Chair, the Plants Committee is invited to take note of the Secretariat's progress in the implementation of these decisions. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Thank you, sir. Plants Committee members, do you have any comments to make on what has just been said? I don't see any requests for the floor. Observer parties now. Any observations? There do not seem to be any requests for the floor. Let me turn now to the observers. No requests for the floor there either. Thank you. The Plants Committee takes note of this document, particularly with respect to the Secretariat's progress in the implementation of decisions 19266 and 19267. We can now begin today's program, and we're on agenda item 14, Countrywide Review of Significant Trade. I would like to give the floor to the chair of the Animals Committee, who will introduce this.
I'm introducing document PC 26, Doc 14, AC 32, Doc 13 on behalf of the chairs of the Animals and Plants committees. Document notes that at its 18th meeting, the Conference of the Parties adopted decisions on countrywide significant trade reviews to determine if such reviews may be a way to address systemic problems in making non-determinant findings at the national level, related more to institutional or other wider challenges other than species-specific issues. This would draw upon the lessons learned, outcomes and impacts of the countrywide review of significant trade of Madagascar. At the 74th meeting of the Standing Committee in Lyon in March 2022, the Secretariat presented a review of existing CITES mechanisms and program activities, including the Compliance Assistance Program CAP and the ongoing work on capacity building, outlining how these mechanisms could provide targeted support to parties identified as requiring assistance in relation to the review of significant trade at the national level. The Secretariat had indicated at SE 74 that it concluded that the scientific and management issues identified in the countrywide significant trade review for Madagascar can be integrated into other existing mechanisms or program activities, in particular the CAP. However, the Standing Committee agreed with the Animals and Plants committees that it was premature to conclude on the need to develop a new mechanism to provide targeted support to parties at a national level based on scientific and management issues identified in the countrywide review of significant trade for Madagascar. The Animals and Plants committees therefore proposed new decisions that were adopted at COP19. Noting that at COP19, the parties also adopted new decisions and a new resolution, namely Resolution Conf 19.2 on capacity building, as well as decisions on the CAP Compliance Assistance Program and revised Resolution Conf 14.3 on CITES compliance procedures. These decisions and resolutions could be relevant to the implementation of Decision 1947 and should be considered in that context. To implement the COP19 decisions on countrywide review of significant trade, the Animals and Plants committees are invited to consider establishing a joint intersessional working group, and the proposed terms of reference for this group are presented in paragraph 9 of the document. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
Thank you, sir. The floor is open. Members of the Plants Committee, you will have heard that you are being asked to give your views on the question of a joint intersessional working group. Committee members, you have the floor.
Je ne vois pas de demande.
I don't see any requests for the floor. I would now like to turn to parties that are observers. The United States, you have the floor.
Vous avez la parole.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States would like to thank the chairs of the Animals and Plants Committees for submission of this document. The United States strongly supports the review of significant trade process, and therefore we firmly support the implementation of decisions 19.47 and 19.48 on countrywide review of significant trade. We support the establishment of the joint intersessional working group with the mandate presented in the recommendations outlined in document AC 32. PC 26, document 14, as it adequately outlines the actions directed to the Animals and Plants Committees in decision 19.47. However, in order to more closely mirror the language in decision 19.47 directed to both committees, we suggest the following addition to the mandate of the joint intersessional working group. paragraph B, which reads, consider whether scientific and management issues identified in the countrywide review of significant trade for Madagascar and outlined in document AC30, Doc 12.3, PC 24, Doc 13.3 are sufficiently addressed through the existing mechanisms, or if appropriate, propose amendments to Resolution Comp 12.8, Rev Cop 18, or other existing resolutions. And here we would add a new phrase, develop a new resolution or propose a new mechanism to undertake such reviews. So the addition is develop a new resolution. We welcome the parties' views on our suggested way forward, and thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, United States. Could you please say once again where you would like to have that language inserted?
Thank you. It is in paragraph B, which reads, consider whether scientific and management issues, and after the phrase that reads, or other existing resolutions, develop a new resolution, because that may be needed rather than modifying the existing ones. Thank you.
Okay. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Would any other observer parties like to take the floor? And please do request the floor if you would like to react to the American proposal. Switzerland, you have the floor. Yes, Switzerland? Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm taking the floor as Switzerland, and we would support the proposed change by the United States because it more clearly reflects what we were asked to do by the Conference of Parties, and it also is another possibility that we should consider in such a work. Thank you.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. I don't see any other requests for the floor. Let me turn now to the observers. No observers are requesting the floor. The Plants Committee is going to establish a joint intersessional working group on countrywide review of significant trade. This is what we have in paragraph 9 of the document as amended. I would like to now invite you to let me know who would like to participate in this intersessional working group. Committee members.
Europe.
Europe.
D'accord. Parti.
Observer parties. DRC, Switzerland, United Kingdom, Canada, Madagascar, United States, European Union, Germany, I don't see any other indications of interest among observer parties. Let me turn now to the observers. AITT, UNEP, WWF, Traffic, Forests, IUCN. Thank you. I'm going to ask the Secretary to read out the list of participants.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of members, it would be Europe. In terms of observer parties, it would be DRC, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, Canada, Madagascar, USA, the European Union, and Germany. For observers, we have AITBT, UNEP, WWF, Traffic, Forest-Based Solutions, and IUCN. Sorry, I meant UNEP WCMC.
Merci, Secrétariat.
Thank you. The group will be chaired by Europe, where the Plants Committee is concerned. In keeping with our procedure for joint intersessional working groups, we have a mandate. So we have an agreement on who the Plants Committee's participants will be. When the Animals Committee decides on their participants, a notification will be sent around. Thank you. We are going to move on to the next agenda item, PC 26 Doc 17, AC Doc 16. This is on NDFs, and I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Document PC 26 Doc 17/AC 32 Doc 16 summarizes ongoing work in the CITES NDF project, which has been established in relations to decisions 19.132 to 19.134. Regarding the continuation of the technical advisory group of the project, the Secretariat assisted the co-chairs of the TAG to adapt the TAG membership in line with changes in the membership of the Standing Plants and Animals Committees adopted at COP19. The membership of the TAG was announced in notification to the parties number 2023/054. The TAG held its meeting online on 26 April 2023. They held its second meeting online, sorry. A summary of the second TAG meeting and resulting advice is available in Annex 1 to the present document. The Secretariat identified the United Nations campus in Gingiri, Nairobi in Kenya as the best venue for this global workshop. It provides the required space, all required conference services, and good international accessibility. Pending ongoing negotiations of a final cost estimate, the Secretariat has reserved meeting rooms and related equipment and services for up to 150 participants during the week from Monday 4 to Friday 8 December 2023. Annex 2 of the document contains an outlined work plan for the workshop, which incorporates advice formulated by the TAG at its second meeting. Criteria for sponsored workshop participants, as noted by the TAG, are available in Annex 3 to the document. A narrative intermediate progress of the ongoing work to develop draft guidance for the consideration of the workshop is appended in Annex 4 of the document. Noting that the TAG of the Animals and Plants Committees has recently discussed and advised on the progress of this work, the Plants Committee is invited to A, note the continuation of the TAG and the progress of the CITES NDF project, and B, note the likely dates and venue of the International Expert Workshop and the advice regarding its organization and work plan made by the TAG at its second meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci, Secrétaire.
Thank you, Secretariat. Committee members, you have the floor.
Je ne vois pas de demande d'intervention.
I don't see any requests for the floor. Let me now turn to observer parties. I see no requests for the floor. Observers, you have the floor. No requests from observers either. The Plants Committee notes document PC 2617, AC 32, Doc 16.
Alors, pour l'examen du point 19 à l'ordre du...
So for item 19 on our agenda, the Secretariat will present document PC 26 Doc 19.
Thank you, Chair. Document PC 26, Doc 19, AC 22, Doc 1932, Doc 19.1 was prepared by the Secretariat. At its 19th meeting of the Conference of the Parties, COP19 adopted decisions 19.142 to 19.144 on materials for the identification of specimens of CITES listed species. COP19 also adopted Resolution Conf 19.4 on materials of the identification of specimens of CITES listed species. This document provides information relating to the implementation of the decisions and the resolution. Decision 19.142 directs the Animals and Plants Committee to establish a joint working group to review selected identification materials, assess the need for revision and improvement, taking into account materials that have been developed by parties and materials requested in the decisions and resolutions. To support this work, the Secretariat has prepared a list of references to species identification in resolutions in Annex 1 and decisions in Annex 2 to the present document. The Secretariat also issued notification to the parties number 2023-061 on 20 April 2023 to invite parties to share information on identification and guidance materials. Valuable contributions were received from Canada, Mexico, Peru, Thailand, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and the United States of America. The materials received will be made available through the CITES Virtual College Identification Materials Database. To implement Decision 19.142, the Animals and Plants Committees are invited to agree on the draft terms of reference for a joint intersessional working group as contained in Annex 3 to the document, and establish a joint international working group and agree on the membership from the Animals and Plants Committee. Thank you.
Merci, Secrétaire.
I thank the Secretariat. As recommended, I suggest that we establish a joint intersessional working group. So members of the committee, I invite you to take the floor to speak to this point. I give the floor to the representative of the North America region.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The North American region supports the important work called for under this item. We support the draft terms of reference as found in Annex 3 to Document 19 with amendments which we have shared with the Secretariat today. We would like to underscore that the primary purpose of identification material is to provide information specific to the identification of CITES-listed species and commodities in trade in order to support implementation and enforcement for CITES-listed species. And to echo the sentiments that were shared as part of the working group on timber identification during the previous intersession, we would remind the committee that two sets of tools are needed. While molecular and forensic identification methods are important once shipments have been held or seized, it is the frontline CITES enforcement officials that need tools to help them determine whether to clear or hold shipments. We also note that parties have at times put forward genus-level listings as a mechanism to deal with lookalike issues due to the inability to distinguish between them at the species level. We urge priority efforts by this group to address this issue. With regard to the draft terms of reference in Annex 3 to Document 19, we propose the following amendments. The first amendment concerns paragraph A, which reads, review selected identification materials and assess the need for their revision and improvement, taking into account the materials that are being developed or have already been developed by parties and materials requested in decisions or resolutions, as well as materials received in response to the notification to the parties numbered 2023/051. There will be new text now reading and other relevant information, such as that compiled during previous discussions of joint intersessional working groups established since COP16 in Thailand 2013. The second amendment would be to insert a new paragraph B, which would read as follows. Take into consideration other items on the agendas of the Animals and Plants Committees related to the development of identification material to support coordination and avoid duplication of effort. The next amendment would be to insert a new paragraph C. When assessing gaps in identification materials, take into account those taxa that have been included in the appendices at higher taxon levels solely due to lookalike issues, as well as the need for frontline and forensic identification tools. Then I have some amendments to the old paragraph B, which is now paragraph D. Consider ways to improve the accuracy and availability of identification materials on CITES listed species. And here we would add, comma, including considerations and implications of linking identification materials directly in the checklist of CITES species. And the website would be then indicated. The last paragraph, which is the old paragraph C, would not have any amendments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
I thank the North American region representative. Do we have any other requests for the floor from committee members? I do not see any. Are there any observer parties who wish to take the floor? Germany. There's a bit of a reflection there, but it's Germany.
Thank you, Chair, for giving me the floor. As an important contribution for the materials identification, especially for the wood identification, I briefly wanted to announce that there is now an updated version of the CITES Wood ID app available that also includes now the newly listed species. Further information can be found in the InfDoc 8, and the app was elaborated and is elaborated by the Scientific Authority of Germany at the Federal Agency for Nature Conservation in collaboration with the Johann Heinrich von Thünen Institute of Wood Research. Within the next few weeks, the app will also be available in a Windows desktop version. Thank you, Chair.
Je remercie la...
I thank the representative of Germany, and I now give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The United Kingdom would like to thank the Secretariat for preparing Document 19, and we support the amendments suggested by the North American region. We would like to note the two information documents, 3 and 7, that the UK has submitted, both of which are tools of ID. Thank you.
Merci.
I thank the United Kingdom. I do not see any other request for the floor from parties, observer parties. So observers, the floor is open to you.
Pas de demande.
There are no requests.
Donc, nous avons...
So we have agreed that we shall establish a joint intersessional working group on ID materials of CITES listed species, and the terms of reference will be those in the document with amendments from North America region with support from a party. So I would now like to open the floor so that you can express your interest in participating in this working group. I will start with members of the committee. African region, Asia.
Maintenant,
No. Any observer parties? Mexico, United Kingdom, China, Canada, United States, European Union, India, Togo, Korea, and now I open the list to observers. Please could you state your name, starting over there.
Oui, c'est
It's ATBT.
Madame.
Madam,
Association.
Merci.
thank you.
International Wood Products Association.
Merci. SSN.
SSN,
Forest-based solutions.
UNEP. WCMC. Merci.
UNEP WCMC, thank you.
Secrétariat, pouvez-vous...
Secretariat, would it be possible to read out the list to ensure we've not missed anyone out?
So in terms of members, we have, Plans Committee members are Africa and Asia. Observer parties, it's Mexico, the United Kingdom, China, Canada, USA, the European Union, India, Togo, and Korea. For observers, we have AITBT, the American Herbal Products Association, International Wood Products Association, SSN, Forest-Based Solutions, and UNEP WCMC.
Merci.
Thank you. I have a request from the representative of the Asia region. Would you please chair this group for the Plants Committee?
Yeah, to share. Merci.
Thank you.
Okay. Donc, comme c'est le cas pour tous les groupes intercession.
So, as is the case for all joint intersessional working groups, the final composition of the group will be sent out by notification. And I'd like to thank the representative of Asia for having volunteered. Thank you.
Donc, nous passons à l'ordre.
So we'll now move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 21. I shall give the floor to the United States, who have prepared document PC 26 Doc 21 AC 32 Doc 20, and they will present it to us now. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States is pleased to introduce this document on the transport of live specimens. As is known, the provisions of the Convention require that parties prepare, ship, and properly care for live specimens in ways that minimize the risk of injury, damage to health, or cruel treatment. The regulations deemed to meet these requirements are from the International Air Transport Association, or IATA, including the IATA Live Animal Regulations, LAR for live animals, and IATA Perishable Cargo Regulations, PCR, for live plants, and for certain specimens, the CITES guidelines for non-air transport of live wild animals and plants. Upholding the IATA regulations helps to minimize stress, injury, and illness for live specimens, maximizing the safety of both animals and plants in transit and the people who handle these shipments. At its 19th meeting, the Conference of the Parties adopted 2 decisions to help parties better comply with these existing guidelines. The United States submitted the present document to assist with next steps for completing Decision 19.158. related to a workshop and the robust number of consultations embedded in this decision. Decision 19.158 directs the Animals Committee and the Plants Committee, in consultation with the Standing Committee, the Secretariat, and IATA, to hold a workshop to share best practices related to live animal and plant transport. It further invites parties with expertise and success in this area to share best practices and to support other parties in meeting CITES requirements for live animal and plant transport. Considering the U.S. engagement with the IATA Live Animals and Perishables Board's Animal Advisory Board, and to assist in advancing the workshop, the U.S. met with the Secretariat and the chairs of the Animals and Standing Committee to discuss a path forward. This resulted in suggested next steps incorporated in the recommendations in the present document, which the Animals and Plants Committees are invited to consider. Specifically, we recommend that the Animals and Plants Committees proceed with the development of the workshop by requesting that the leads on this issue, identified in each of the 2 committees, collaborate with the Secretariat by developing the terms of reference for the virtual workshop to tentatively be held in January 2024, and provide the terms of reference for consideration by the Standing Committee, and that the Secretariat issue a notification to the parties to welcome feedback about workshop content and to request expressions of interest from parties and relevant experts in serving as workshop instructors. As noted in the document, the aim of the workshop is to increase parties' use of the IATA Live Animal Regulations and Perishable Cargo Regulations. Through greater understanding of how to use these regulations, relevant personnel involved in shipping live CITES-listed animals and plants will be better able to inspect such shipments at origin and destination to reduce injury, stress, illness, and mortality, clarify holding and handling of live specimens, and understand and address additional challenges faced by parties related to live animal and plant transport. We welcome the opportunity to continue working together with partners and with interested parties to make these important standards consistently implemented and improve them as needed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci à la...
Thank you, United States. I now give the floor to members of the committee who may wish to speak on the subject.
Je ne vois pas de...
I do not see any request for the floor, so I open the floor to observer parties. I see no request for the floor. Do we have any observers who wish to comment on this item?
Je vois pas...
I do not see any request for the floor. So the committee request the representative of Europe, Ms. Moser, and Mr. Mallet to work with the Secretariat to develop the terms of reference for the virtual workshop. And they also asked that the Secretariat publish a notification to the parties to request feedback on this workshop and invites parties and relevant experts to declare their expressions of interest in taking part and working as workshop instructors.
Vous avez la parole.
You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I request to be included in that work with the member from Europe to support the workshop development? Thank you, Chair.
Je vous remercie. Et le...
I thank you, and Europe also agrees. Thank you.
Le point suivant.
The next item is on document PC 26.22 AC 32.22, and I'll give the floor to the Secretariat to present the document. Thank you, Madam Chair. The Secretariat.
22 on the specimens produced through biotechnology. This document has been prepared by Cuba as chair of the Standing Committee's working group on that topic, and reports on the implementation of decisions 19161, 19162, and 19163. As reported in paragraph 4, at its 76th meeting, the Standing Committee has established a working group on specimens produced through biotechnology, and the membership and mandate are available on the CITES website. Regarding the implementation of decision 19163, the Secretariat estimates that the cost of the meeting mentioned in that decision to facilitate the discussions mentioned in decision 19161 and develop guidance on the implementation of the amendment to resolution Conf 9.6, Ref COP 19 on trade in readily recognizable parts and derivatives will be approximately $80,000. At present, the Secretariat has not been able to secure the funds for the meeting, but based on discussions with the chair of the working group, agreed that an online meeting could take place to initiate the work and to discuss the elements to be addressed in that decision. Madam Chair, the Plants Committee is invited to note the document and to nominate representatives to participate in the Standing Committee's intersessional working group. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci, Secrétariat.
I thank the Secretariat. Do we have any comments from members of the committee?
Je ne vois pas de demande.
I see no request for the floor. I now turn to observer parties.
Les États-Unis.
United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We'll just note very briefly that we would support the recommendation that the Animals and Plants Committees nominate representatives to participate in the Standing Committee's intersessional working group on this issue. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
I thank you, United States. Do we have any other request for the floor? I now open the floor to observers.
Pas de demande.
I see no request for the floor. So the Plants Committee takes note of document PC 26 Doc 22, AC 32 Doc 22. Thank you.
Maintenant,
So now on the representative from the Plants Committee who could participate in the Standing Committee's intersessional working group, I would like to ask the representative of Asia if they can confirm their interest in representing the Plants Committee at that group. Yes, thank you. So you shall be a member of that Standing Committee intersessional working group. Thank you.
alors, pour le point 23, alors...
So for item 23 on our agenda, I shall give the floor to the chair of the Animals Committee to present the document. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Document PC 26 Doc 23 AC 32 Doc 25.1 addresses matters to consider in the implementation of decisions 19179 to 19180 on the review of CITES provisions related to trade in specimens of animals and plants not of wild source. During the previous intersessional period, committee members noted that the committees were not able to fully implement the decision in terms of the identification of key scientific issues and challenges in the application of the Convention to non-wild specimens. The former Standing Committee working group that considered this matter during the previous intersessional period also did not consider plants. It was therefore agreed to propose the extension of the decision to further work beyond COP19, resulting in the adoption of the current decisions. As the AC and PC are directed to consider the elements of Decision 19/180 separately and together, the committees should consider the most effective way of doing this. The committee should take into consideration the fact that the Standing Committee established an intersessional working group chaired by Belgium and Canada, and that the Standing Committee working group has initiated its work. A draft roadmap has been shared with members of the Standing Committee intersessional working group and is contained in INF-Doc PC 26 INF2. An option to be considered by the committee is to establish a joint intersessional working group with the Animals Committee. The leads and co-leads assigned by the committees for these decisions could co-chair the working group to facilitate the consultation process with the Standing Committee intersessional working group. A draft terms of reference for such a joint intersessional working group is proposed in the annex to the present document for consideration by the committee. Taking into consideration the roadmap in the information document, the committee could consider focusing its work on paragraphs C, D, and E. The co-chair of the Standing Committee Working Group, Canada, is attending the meeting, and it may inform discussions if Canada could provide an update to the committee on the activities of the working group. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, sir. I would like, first of all, to turn to Canada. Perhaps Canada could give us some additional information as you suggested, sir.
And thank you to the chair of the Animals Committee. So as noted, the Standing Committee struck a working group to address Decision 19.179, and that's co-chaired by ourselves, Canada, and Belgium. The first part of the mandate of the working group was to develop a roadmap in consultation with the Animals and Plants Committees. So the co-chairs of the working group drafted a roadmap, which is found in INF 2 for this meeting, and we welcome the reactions of the Plants Committee. The intersessional working group has also commented on the draft roadmap, and that will lead to a revised roadmap. The co-chairs designed this roadmap to take a step back and understand the viewpoints underlying the parties' use of resolutions that apply to non-wild animals and artificially propagated plants. The intent was to have that foundational understanding of the differing views in mind when tackling the bulk of the issue, which is described in the later stages in the roadmap. It was not to judge or evaluate. So the feedback from the working group has been mixed, and the co-chairs will work to adapt the roadmap in response to the feedback from the working group and to any feedback received from the Animals and Plants Committee. For this committee, notably in our roadmap, the co-chairs of the working group are proposing that the Animals and Plants Committee provide their feedback on what we have identified as item 1C in our draft roadmap. So asking questions about conservation risk and the variability of conservation risk between plants and animals. This would be in addition to the aspects found in the decision directed to the scientific committees, decision 19.180, which are also found in the draft terms of reference of PC 26 Doc 23, paragraphs C and D, as the chair of the Animals Committee mentioned. With regards to those draft terms of reference, so from a co-chair's perspective, we do hope to get some insights on the roadmap from the Animals Committee and the Plants Committee soon, so that we can finalize the roadmap and begin the substantive work of the committee, of the intersessional working group of the Standing Committee. And then, we would recommend, as the chair of the Animals Committee noted, focus as well on the two paragraphs C and D found in the draft terms of reference found in the annex to the document to this meeting. So thank you, Chair.
Merci.
Thank you, Canada. We are going to consider the establishment of a joint intersessional working group and its composition. Committee members. Before we actually establish the working group, as has just been said, paragraphs C, D, and E in the annex to document 23 or 25 give us the mandate or terms of reference for the intersessional working group. You have that in the annex to the document. So as to the composition of that group, I would like members of the committee to let me know if they would like to be members of this intersessional working group. Oceania? I would now like to turn to observer parties. United States, South Africa, Germany, Australia, Malaysia, India, Russian Federation, Korea, European Union, United States, Canada, Peru, United Kingdom, Mexico, are you requesting the floor? Okay, let me just turn to the observers, then come back to you, if I may. Observers. Traffic, UNEP, WCMC. Thank you. Could you introduce yourself, please? Euromet. United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We note that the recommendation in the document was that the Animals and Plants Committees were invited to consider the establishment of an intersessional working group. So we thought that it would actually be helpful to have some discussion here about whether that would be the best approach. We have some concerns in looking at the terms of reference in this document that while we recognize that the intention would be for an intersessional working group of the Animals and Plants Committees, and I think we would want to consider whether that working group should be confined only to committee members or it should be broader to member parties and observer organizations as well. But with regard to the terms of reference, we have some concerns that they very closely parallel the terms of reference for the Standing Committee Intersessional Working Group on this issue that has already been established. And as we have recognized, it was very difficult to make progress during the last intersessional period in the Standing Committee Working Group, and we are considering many of the issues that we had hoped to address during the previous intersessional period. So just to say that this is a very complex and weedy issue and that we have concerns about setting up a parallel process here that is essentially tasked with doing the same things that the Standing Committee Working Group is already considering. So we would want to be very thoughtful about whether to establish an intersessional working group in this body, and if so, what tasks that working group should be doing that would be different from what the Standing Committee Working Group is doing, and how those would be complementary and feed into each other so as not to duplicate work or create additional confusion. So just a couple of thoughts for consideration of this body. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
Thank you, the United States. I have heard you.
Donc,
I would like to thank the United States for having mentioned these issues. I would like to give the floor to Canada. Canada might have some useful information. You have the floor.
Thank you, and I am speaking as Canada, not as co-chair of the intersessional working group of the Standing Committee. So to the U.S. point, I tend to agree with the U.S. It's really important that we are kind of all rowing in the same direction. And so however the committees decide to tackle the decision that was addressed to the Animals and Plants Committee, it will be incredibly important to make sure that there is a tight linkage between the discussions happening on those points and the discussions happening in the working group of the Standing Committee. From that perspective, Canada also agrees that C and D of the draft terms of reference are important for the Animals and Plants Committee work. It is what was directed to them in the decision adopted by the COP. From the perspective of how that information will help the Standing Committee working group, I think it'll provide some of the background perspectives on some of the scientific considerations and the unique considerations that might be in play when you're considering the trade in artificially propagated plants or in captive bred animals. And we would look for that to feed into some of the eventually some fundamental implementation issues that the Standing Committee working group will be considering. And so that's part of that building that foundation to make sure we have a common understanding of the risks we're trying to mitigate and the actions we're trying to achieve collectively. From that perspective, Canada does not support the paragraph B that's proposed in the draft terms of reference in document PC 26, Doc 23, as this is a place where we would end up potentially having overlap or depending on how the discussions go in the Standing Committee working group going in different directions. And so we think it's best to remove that paragraph and to focus on the decisions that were directed to the two committees, and then to make sure some tight linkages, be it through participation of the leads of any intersessional working group in the Standing Committee working group, and certainly as I'll put my co-chair on the spot as the Standing Committee co-chair, but certainly as the co-chairs, we would be happy to engage with the leads and the chairs of any intersessional working group of these committees to ensure that we are really well understanding the processes that are occurring. So that could be another approach. So yeah, obviously committee, we're in your hands, but I would underscore the importance of making sure that tight connection that our colleague from the United States mentioned. Thank you, Chair.
merci.
Thank you for that statement, which really does help clarify matters. I would now like to give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. The United Kingdom would like to thank the chairs of the Animals and Plants Committee for preparing this document. We agree with the USA that the work conducted in an intersessional working group should be complementary to the Standing Committee intersessional working group. We note that plants were not dealt with by the Standing Committee working group, and we would like to recommend that two subgroups are formed for plants and animals, respectively, that can feed into the Standing Committee working group using the roadmap in Doc 2. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to take the floor?
OK. Bon. Je pensais que ça allait.
Well, I thought this was going to be a straightforward matter, but I was mistaken. We have 3 proposals to consider. First of all, the one I made in talking about a joint intersessional working group with the terms of reference, with the draft terms of reference in an annex to the document, but only using paragraphs C, D, and E. That would be the terms of reference for the joint intersessional working group. That's one possibility. Then the United States took the floor and they stressed the overlapping or duplication of activities. Then Canada took the floor and they suggested that we concentrate just on C and D. Then the United Kingdom suggested that there be 2 subgroups, one for the Animals Committee, and I guess that would involve terms of reference C and D if I followed properly, and then the Plants Committee with C and D as terms of reference, and the results of those 2 separate groups would be transmitted to the Standing Committee. These are the options that we have, as I understand it. This in the light of the discussions that we have just had. So I'd like to open the floor once again and hear from you on which of these 3 possibilities seems to you to be the best one in the light of the task before us. And please do let me know if I've accurately summarized our discussions.
Je donne la parole.
Committee members, you have the floor. Then observer parties. And let me first of all give the floor to the chair of the Animals Committee.
Thank you, Chair. I think the best way forward is to make sure to leave it at C, D, and E. I mean, F, we will have to report to this joint session anyway. That remains anyway. So we would work on C, D, and E, and we would have to make sure that the leads or the chairs of this working group have a close collaboration with the chairs of the Standing Committee working group, and this should maybe be reflected somewhere. But I think it's clear for the 2 committees that we restrict our consideration to the scientific aspects of these questions, and we will have to make sure that we do not overlap with what is the mandate of the Standing Committee, but that will be up to the chairs of this intersessional working group, the joint one. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
Thank you, Chair of the Animals Committee. I would now like to give the floor to the United States, to be followed by the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We very much agree with the comments just made by the Chair of the Animals Committee, and think that your suggestion of establishing this working group, this intersessional working group, is a very good idea. We also take the comments from the United Kingdom, and we agree very much that that the issues related to plants and animals are very different in the context of this discussion, and so we would be inclined to support the suggestion that they be 2 separate working groups. So a working group of the Plants Committee that would consider the scientific and technical aspects of these issues, so paragraphs C, D, and E, with regard to plants, and then have a separate discussion for animals once we have that meeting. But we support this way forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
Thank you. The United Kingdom has the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Just for some clarification, we would actually like to support Canada's recommendation only in that the work is divided into smaller manageable groups on plants and animals. We weren't necessarily suggesting two very distinct subgroups, but more with separate terms of reference, but more in a logistical manner that the respective specialists would work on different parts, perhaps within the same subgroup, but just to ensure that the whole mandate was covered and that nothing was sort of missed out, in particular pertaining to plants. We are happy to collaborate on a way forward, but we weren't maybe initially very clear. We weren't necessarily saying that distinct subgroups would be needed, but we also are willing to listen to the floor for a way forward. I just wanted to be a bit more clear. Thank you.
Mexique, vous avez la parole.
Mexico, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam. I would like to thank the delegation of the United States for drawing our attention to the importance of not duplicating what is being done by the Standing Committee. We need, of course, to make sure that the scientific committees concentrate on technical and scientific issues. I would like to thank Canada for the document. I don't think we often refer to INF docs. We had a quick look at it, but we do think it's a very good proposal. This roadmap would be of great help when it comes to our working methods, and you can also clearly understand the differences between plant and animal specimens. So I think striking B from the draft terms of reference would be a good idea. And I think there is a good idea to have parties and members joining the work. So let's strike B. And with respect to what the chair of the Animals Committee chair said, the idea is to work in parallel fashion to see how plants and animal specimens are managed so that that information could be transmitted to the Standing Committee. Now, I think the simplest way forward might be to maintain the working group, and I think they will then have to find ways of communicating with the Standing Committee. This has got complicated, but it is a good idea for us to think clearly so that we don't duplicate the work being done by the Standing Committee. Thank you. Thank you, Mexico. Would anyone else like to take the floor? That does not seem to be the case. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to take the floor again. So first of all, Canada would also agree with the points made by the Chair of the Animals Committee in terms of the mandate. We didn't mean to suggest removing E. We just wanted to recognize that the C and D part were the substantive work. So we agree with the chair, and I think with everyone we've heard here, that the parts C, D, E, and F of the draft terms of reference are the key points. We also agree with the UK and the US that the plants issues and the animals issues are quite different. And so I think what we're struggling with here is how to organize so that both of those discussions, which could have different issues to consider, happen in a streamlined manner without creating too much duplication. I wish I had a good solution, I do appreciate the approach proposed by the US about 2 separate working groups so that that separate discussion could occur, but I also recognize that that creates a proliferation of working groups, which can be challenging to coordinate between. I do wonder if perhaps your original idea of having one intersessional working group with 2 very clear leads, one set of leads from the Plants Committee and one from the Animals Committee, would allow for the cross-linkage between the 2 scientific committees as needed, but with the 2 leads really taking focus on the issues related to plants and animals. And then I think you might wish to invite the Standing Committee Working Group co-chairs to work very closely with the 2 separate leads of the Animals Committee representatives on potentially a joint work and the Plants Committee representative on the joint work, such that that might help those 2 separate representatives maybe start some side conversations, as the UK had suggested, subgroups or some new mechanism that we can create, but still maintain that connectivity between all those discussions. I recognize this will put a lot of emphasis to the various leads and co-chairs to make sure to maintain a tight collaboration, which I'm sure our colleagues in the Secretariat will help us keep moving forward in that way. And I see our colleague nodding. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
Thank you. I very much appreciate all of these proposals being made so that we can try and move forward. There does seem to be a glimmer of light here. One thing is certain. We do have consensus on the terms of reference, C, D, E, and F. So now that we have the terms of reference, what are we going to do with them? How can we ensure that the terms of reference are taken up by one group or 2 groups? But let me first give the floor to the United Kingdom.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to agree with Canada in that the intersessional working group have defined Plants Committee and Animals Committee leads, but does still work as one intersessional working group. We think that that's a good way forward, and perhaps we could identify the Plant Committee lead here today, and that would help us to move forward. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you.
Asie, vous avez la parole.
Asia, you have the floor. To be followed by the United States.
Thank you, Chair. And actually, thanks to the Chair of the Animals Committee and the parties for their statement on revising the term of reference and clarifying the work on whether to establish those intersessional working group to perform the decisions. And for that, now their opinions, like not very different, but they have different kind of opinions, and we suggest you can establish a small drafting in-session working group at noon and talk about discussing the term of reference and put back here at maybe tomorrow or this afternoon. Is that okay for you? Thank you, Chair.
Je pense que
I think that we don't have a difference there on the terms of reference. We're already in agreement on the establishment of an intersessional working group. That is something we've agreed. The terms of reference, we're also in agreement because it's items, the points C, D, E, and F from the draft decision point. So now it's a case of what are the operational modalities of this intersessional working group. I think we have a proposal to make on the United States. Would you like to speak? You were to follow Asia. Take the floor, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We appreciate the comments that have been made here. We do, however, continue to very strongly believe that animals and plants are fundamentally different, and in particular with regard to artificially propagated, captive bred, and the various iterations around those kinds of production systems. And so our preference continues to be that the Plants Committee have its own intersessional working group and the Animals Committee have an intersessional working group to discuss these issues, right, paragraphs C, D, and E of these terms of reference, and that the chairs of those two working groups consult and collaborate very closely with the Standing Committee co-chairs so that the chairs of the three working groups are closely working together and aligned and collaborating, and that we make sure that all of those issues are being considered. But we have concerns about having the animals and plants issues discussed together. Thank you, Madam Chair.
OK. Bon, on essaye.
Okay. We have tried to put something together. So the idea would be that the Plants Committee and the Animals Committee have decided to establish an intersessional, I'm going to read it in English, says the chair.
Agrees the establishment of the joint intersessional working group that will work separately and jointly, and its composition. Agrees that the co-chair of the intersessional working group participate in the Standing Committee intersessional working group. Invite the co-chair of the Standing Committee intersessional working group to work closely with the ACPC joint intersessional working group in implementing their mandates. Voilà à peu près.
So that is the idea. Are we in agreement? So we have a working group for animals and one working group for plants, and they will work separately, but within a joint process, so that the information can be fed up to the Standing Committee.
Et le mandat, bien sûr.
And the terms of reference, of course, will be C, D, E, and F of the draft terms of reference. I see that the United Kingdom agrees. Thank you. United States as well. So I think we found a solution. I do not see any other comments. So does this option suit everyone? And does the Plants Committee agree to this? Thank you, everyone.
No. Nous allons
and we will nominate the representative from the Oceania region to work on behalf of the Plants Committee, and you will chair. Thank you.
Alors, nous passons.
Now we will move on to consideration of item 24, and to do so, I will give the Secretariat the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Document 24 on guidance on the term artificially propagated reports that the preliminary guidance on terms related to artificial propagation of CITES regulated plants was published on the CITES website in February 22, as agreed by the Plants Committee during the last intersessional cycle. Decision 19.182 instructs the Secretariat to revise and amend this preliminary guidance and to submit it for approval by the Plants Committee. The required external funding for this work has been partially, but not yet entirely secured, and the Secretariat intends to allocate the partial funding to the development of a draft of the revised guidance, which it will present to the Plants Committee in accordance with Decision 19.182 and 19.183. The Plants Committee is invited to take note of the Secretariat's progress in the implementation of this decision. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci, Secretariat.
I thank the Secretariat, and I now give the floor to members of the committee. If you wish to comment. I do not see any request for the floor. I now open the floor for observer parties. Canada.
Thank you, Chair. And Canada would first like to thank Switzerland for the additional funding to support the further development of guidance document on terms related to the artificial propagation of CITES regulated plants, and to UNEP WCMC for carrying out the work. For the information of the committee, I note that under the Trilateral Commission for Environmental Cooperation, which is the environmental arm of the United States, Mexico, Canada trade agreement, a project titled Strengthening the Implementation and Effective Enforcement of CITES for Timber in North America includes a specific activity that will be undertaken to develop guidance on CITES source code Y implementation and conducting non-detriment findings for tree species. With respect to the guidance document under revision, we suggest that in the discussion of the new source code Y, the guidance could clarify explicitly that because source code Y specimens do not meet the definition of artificially propagated, they therefore do not qualify for the exemptions and other special provisions under Article 7, paragraphs 4 or 5. As a result, commercial trade in specimens of Appendix I species that are source code Y would be prohibited under Article 3, paragraph 3C. This could add clarity with respect to the limitations of trade in source code Y specimens. With respect to the review of the document, A Guide to the Application of CITES Source Codes, we support the addition of text that would incorporate information about the new source code Y. We note that the review offers an opportunity to correct errors in the source code dichotomous key at the bottom of page 7 and in box 28 on page 17 of that guidance. where the respective schematics suggest that source code D in plants would only apply to cases where the specimen has been propagated in a CITES registered nursery. This is not consistent with Resolution Conf 12.3, which does not include a requirement for inclusion in the Secretariat's registrar in its definition for source code D for plants. It is similarly not consistent with Resolution Conf 9.19, which recognizes that nurseries that are not registered may still continue exporting artificially propagated specimens of Appendix I species using the standard procedures for obtaining export permits. It also incorrectly suggests that the use of source code A for Appendix I plants grown for commercial purposes. We do acknowledge that the source code guidance would also need to account for Resolution Conf 11.11 paragraph 4, which recommends that registered nurseries be used for commercial trade in Appendix I specimens in the exceptional case where propagules for artificially propagation are collected from the wild. So obviously there's complexity there, but we do recommend that source code guidance use that opportunity to correct those errors. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Canada.
Thank you, Canada, for your statement. Mexico, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We support that we try and find consistency in guidance on the use of codes and terms linked to artificial propagation, as we've heard from Canada, in particular when it comes to the code J. We also propose that we look at the consistency in the regulation of nurseries that produce Appendix I listed species, and often they produce endemic species from countries such as Mexico, but they don't necessarily make it clear the parental stock origin. So in Resolution 1111, where there's a recommendation that nurseries artificially producing species from Appendix I for commercial purposes should have registration with the CITES Secretariat to ensure they are in line with the Resolution 9.15 on nurseries that produce artificially species of plants which are listed in Appendix I for export purposes. And where propagules come from the wild, in order to be able to use the extension of Article 7 and the D source code, in order to ensure that there's clarity and consistency, we need to have a very clear understanding of this guidance. This is arduous work, and we would ask the Secretariat to do it with a great deal of care. Thank you.
Merci au représentant.
I thank the representative of Mexico. I see no further request for the floor. United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The U.S. supports the comments made by Canada, and we find that would be very useful to make those changes. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, U.S. Do we have any further requests from the floor from observer parties or observers? No request for the floor.
Merci.
Thank you. So the Plants Committee takes note of the document and requests that the Secretariat take into account the points of view that were heard in the plenary when a new and second edition of the guidance is prepared. Thank you.
Je prie le
I would like to ask the Secretariat to present the next document, PC 26 Doc 25, AC 32 Doc 27, which has been prepared by them.
Thank you, Chair. Document PC 26, Doc 25, and AC 32, Doc 26 was prepared by the Secretariat. At COP19, Decision 19.184 to 19.185 on assessment of Appendix I listed species was adopted. This document provides a background on how this initiative came to be, an overview of progress, and updates on the implementation of the decisions. In brief, a rapid assessment of conservation status of and legal and illegal trade in species included in Appendix I was conducted by assessing all Appendix I listed species against 10 criteria in 4 overarching categories and using 3 different scoring approaches to identify species for detailed assessments. The provisional results of the rapid assessment was presented to the joint session of the 31st meeting of the Animals Committee and the 25th meeting of the Plants Committee. At this meeting, Mexico proposed an alternate way of identifying species for detailed assessments. Taking this into account, the Secretariat selected a list of 10 species for detailed assessments, which includes 2 flora species. The species are listed in paragraph 11, and their positions in the 4-quadrant analysis presented by Mexico is presented in paragraph 12. The Secretariat provides a summary of the detailed assessments of these 10 species in the annex to the present document, and the detailed assessments will be shared with the range states to invite them and relevant experts to provide information that are not readily available in scientific literature. Based on the responses by the range states and experts, the detailed assessments will be finalized, and the Secretariat will prepare a report which includes the recommendations on possible actions within the CITES mandates to improve the status of the species and provide information to refine the methodology for an assessment of Appendix I species. To implement Decision 19.185 on assessment of Appendix I listed species, the Animals and Plants Committees are invited to establish a joint intersessional working group with a mandate as presented in paragraph 16. Thank you.
Merci,
I thank the Secretariat. Members of the committee, I invite you to speak on the potential for setting up an intersessional joint working group. I see no request for the floor. Observer parties?
Pas de demande d'intervention.
I do not see any request for the floor. Observers?
Pas de demande d'intervention.
I see no request for the floor. So, the Plants Committee establishes an intersessional joint working group. And please, first of all, the terms of reference. The terms of reference are set out in paragraph 16, A to C. the terms of reference for the group. So now we will move to the composition of this intersessional working group. So please raise your nameplates to let us know that you wish to participate in the working group. Committee members, Asia. Observer parties, Mexico, United States, Zimbabwe, Germany, European Union, South Africa, Spain, Portugal, Madagascar, observers. Oh, I beg your pardon. Switzerland is amongst the parties as well. Now, observers. IUCN, UNEP, WCMC, WWF, Traffic, Forest-Based Solutions, Secretariat, would it possible? And we have a North American region as well. If I could ask the Secretariat to provide us with the list of the members of this group.
So for the Plants Committee members, we have Asia and the North American region. For parties, we have Mexico, the United States of America, Zimbabwe, Germany, the European Union, South Africa, Spain, Portugal, Madagascar, and Switzerland. For observers, we have IUCN, UNEP WCMC, WWF, Traffic, and Forest-Based Solutions.
Donc,
So, for the Plants Committee, the representative of Asia will chair the committee, the group. And the full membership will be sent to you by notification once the Animals Committee has met.
Donc, nous passons.
So now we'll move on to the next item, which is item 26 on our agenda. And for this presentation, I will give the floor to the chair of the Animals Committee. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Document PC 26, Doc 26, AC 32, Doc 27 addresses key considerations in implementing decisions 19186 to 19188 on identifying information on species at risk of extinction affected by international trade. The focus is on the possible process or mechanism how under Resolution Conf 19.2 on capacity building to provide parties with information to be considered in the preparation of listing proposals when parties request such information. The terms of reference of the Animals and Plants Committees of the Conference of the Parties as contained in Resolution Conf 18.2 on establishment of committees includes that committees shall, upon request by parties, provide advice related to scientific, technical and nomenclature aspects of proposals to amend the appendices. The development of any process or mechanism should take into consideration the existing terms of reference of the committees and the limited resources of the committees also referred to in this resolution. A few options for sharing information are contained in paragraph 8 of the document, and capacity building options are contained in paragraph 9. The Animals and Plants Committees should consider the need to establish a joint intersessional working group to develop the draft recommendations for consideration by the Standing Committee. Draft terms of reference for such a joint intersessional working group are contained in an annex to the present document, should the Animals and Plants Committees decide to establish a working group. The committees should furthermore nominate representatives to participate in the Standing Committee's intersessional working group. The committees could consider allocating this task to the leads and co-leads assigned to this matter as per the work plans. The chair of the Standing Committee Working Group, the United Kingdom, is attending the meeting, and it may inform discussions if the UK could provide an update to the committee on the activities of this working group. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, sir. I would like to give the floor to the United Kingdom for further information. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The UK would like to thank the chairs of the Plants and Animals Committee for preparing this document. We would like to provide a brief update in our role as the chair of the Standing Committee Working Group on species at risk of extinction affected by international trade. We have recently commenced this working group and shared a plan for the sequencing of the work of a potential Plants and Animals Committee intersessional working group with that of the Standing Committee Working Group. To enable the correct sequencing of work, we expect the main part of the Standing Committee's discussion to be after the next Plants and Animals Committee, when the recommendations from these committees will be formalised. As noted in the recommendations of PC 26, Doc 26, nominees from Plants Committee are welcome to join the Standing Committee Working Group to help connect between the two strands of this work. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
I would like to thank the United Kingdom for that statement. We have heard two statements on this item, and we have a proposal for an intersessional working group, a joint working group. I would like to now turn to committee members. The floor is open.
En tant que...
I will participate in the work of this group as a representative for Africa. Could I ask if any other committee members would like to participate in the joint intersessional working group? North America? Asia? Okay, I'd like to turn now to observer parties. Mexico, United States, Canada, Thailand, United Kingdom, Zimbabwe, European Union, Observers, the floor is open. Traffic, IUCN, UNEP, SSN. I would like to ask the Secretariat to read out the working group membership list.
Sorry, the members would be Africa, the North American region, and Asia. Parties are Mexico, USA, Canada, Thailand, the United Kingdom, Zimbabwe, and the European Union. And observers, we have traffic, IUCN, UNEP, WCMC, and SSN.
Okay. Et le mandat se...
And the terms of reference for this working group are to be found in the annex to document 26. We have draft terms of reference in the annex.
Pour la présidence de ce...
With respect to the chairing of this intersessional working group, I would like to invite the representative of North America to take on that role. He has agreed. Thank you.
Donc, il nous reste une des recommandations.
We have one more recommendation to consider that has to do with the appointment of Plants Committee representatives to participate in the intersessional working group of the Standing Committee. And the idea is to have the leads, the co-leads, that is to say, myself and Ian, the representative of Europe and the representative of North America. So could I ask if you would all agree to participate in the intersessional working group of the Standing Committee on this matter? Yes? Yes? You're happy with that? I'm referring to the Standing Committee intersessional working group. Thank you.
Alors, nous passons au...
We're now moving on to agenda item 35. The Secretariat is going to introduce PC 26 Doc 35. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Document PC 26 Doc 35, AC 32 Doc 42 was prepared by the Secretariat. And this short document recalls the task directed to the Animals and Plants Committees under Resolution Conf 18.2 on establishment of committees concerning conducting periodic reviews of species included in Appendix I and II, and the process for undertaking such reviews as set out in Resolution Conf 14.8 Rev Cop 19. A new list of species was scheduled to be selected for a review at the first meetings of the Animals and Plants Committee meetings following COP19. However, the Secretariat has not been able to secure funding to undertake the assessment required under paragraph 3b(i) of Resolution Conf 14.8 Rev Cop 19. Should the required funding become available in time to undertake the assessment, the outputs could be presented for the 27th meeting of the Plants Committee and the 33rd meeting of the Animals Committee, respectively. And finally, the document notes that the current status of ongoing periodic reviews for animal species and plant species are presented on the dedicated web page entitled Periodic Review for Species included in Appendices 1 and 2 on the CITES website. So the committee is invited to note this document. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
I would like to thank the Secretariat. Committee members, do you have any comments to make on this document, 35?
No.
That does not seem to be the case. Observer parties now, Mexico. Thank you, Madam. The periodic review is one of the pillars of the Convention. The Convention seeks to ensure that species are listed in the right appendix depending on the need for the regulation of international trade. This in keeping with Objective 1.4 of our strategic vision. And we are rather concerned that it has been difficult to get funding for this project, this in keeping with Conf 14.8. We would be grateful if the Secretariat could let us know what sorts of alternatives they have considered so as to deal with this matter as soon as possible and avoid such situations in the future. This is the first time that this matter has not been dealt with after a COP. We have been involved in many periodic reviews. We really do feel strongly that species should be in the right appendices, and this is really an unprecedented situation. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Mexico. Would anyone else like to take the floor? Observer parties, the United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States agrees with Mexico that the periodic review process is important and provides the opportunity for range countries to look at the status of species through an objective technical lens in accordance with the criteria found in Resolution Conf 9.24. We saw several proposals at the last COP that were successfully adopted as a result of an objective periodic review. And therefore, we regret we haven't been able to do that. The U.S. is trying to seek funds to support this effort for the next ACPC, and hopefully we will succeed in finding those funds. So, thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, United States. Would any other observer parties like to take the floor? Central and South America and the Caribbean, you have the floor. Thank you, Madam. I simply wish to express my agreement with what was said by Mexico. This really is a first. We would urge the Secretariat to try to find funding for this. And we have funding for other sorts of activities that are not so central to the convention, whereas this really is the cornerstone of our convention, and the future reviews undertaken by COPs depend on these periodic reviews, and the different administrative authorities in our different countries really do need this sort of review. Thank you, Madam.
Merci.
Thank you, sir. The representative of Central and South America and the Caribbean. Would anyone else like to take the floor? Any observers? The floor is yours. I don't see any request for the floor. Would the Secretariat like to take the floor to respond to the concerns expressed by Mexico and their question about alternative sources of funding?
Thank you, Chair. And of course, the Secretariat notes the importance that the parties put on this process. And we will continue to endeavour to seek funds for undertaking this assessment. But of course, in the event that there is no funding secured, we will try to find some alternative means to be able to have the committees look at a list of potential species for review in the future. This is something that we understand how important this resolution is, but obviously, you know, funding is always a limiting factor, but we will do our very best to make sure that we can move this forward at the next meeting. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. The Plants Committee takes note of document PC 26 Doc 35 AC 32 Doc 42, which brings us to our next agenda item. And I would like to give the floor to the Secretariat to introduce the PC 26 Doc 40. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The recently adopted paragraph G of annotation number 4, as adopted at COP19, exempts finished products derived from artificial propagation, packaged and ready for retail trade of cosmetics containing parts and derivatives of Blatia striata, Cygnotches coperi, Gastrodia elata, Phalaenopsis amabilis, and Phalaenopsis lobii. This exception entered into effect in February 2023. To allow parties sufficient time to implement paragraph 4G of annotation number 4, The Secretariat intends to issue the notification within the first quarter of 2024 and will compile any responses to the notification as called for under Decision 19268 for consideration by the 27th meeting of the Plants Committee and the 78th meeting of the Standing Committee in 2024. The Plants Committee is invited to note the document and the proposed time frame for publication of the notification. Thank you very much.
Merci au secrétariat.
I would like to thank the Secretariat for introducing the document. Committee members, you have the floor.
Je donne maintenant la parole.
Observer parties, you have the floor, should you wish to give your views. I see no request for the floor. Observers now. No request for the floor there either. The Plants Committee takes note of the document and the proposed time frame for the publication of the notification as per Decision 19268. Which brings us to agenda item 41. This will be introduced by the Secretariat.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us the floor. Document 41 on annotation of Cape Aloe, Aloe ferox, and its annexes compile and summarize responses to notification 2023/021, which aimed to review whether the amended annotation number 4 that exempts finished Aloe ferox products ready for retail trade from CITES regulation has impacted trade or the population status of the species. 5 responses were received, including from South Africa as one of only 2 range states of Aloe ferox. Responses point out that trade was partially interrupted due to the COVID-19 pandemic, which confounds any effects caused since the exemption came into effect in 2019. Responses also point out that the exemption removed the obligation to monitor trade in finished products ready for retail trade in the species, which is why no recent information on trade in such products is available. With these limitations in mind, the responses report limited impacts of the exemption on trade, but note that the trade may now be increasing again. South Africa reports that the resource base of the species is unlikely to have fundamentally changed throughout the last 3 years, and that the conservation of the species is now supported by a resource monitoring plan to assess any impacts on the resource base. Based on this and any other information, the Plants Committee is invited to review document 41 and its annexes, assess whether the exemption for Aloe ferox has provided in paragraph F of annotation number 4 has had any impact on the natural populations of the species, and to formulate recommendations concerning the listing of Aloe ferox for consideration of the 20th meeting of the Conference of the Parties. Thank you.
Thanks, Secretariat.
Thank you, Secretariat. Committee members, you have the floor. Parties? The United States, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we indicated in our response to notification to the parties number 2023-021, it is difficult to assess the impacts of an exemption, and furthermore, much of the period since the exemption entered into force has been during the global pandemic caused by the COVID-19 virus. Therefore, we recommend that the Secretariat be requested to analyze updated trade data, including CITES annual report and CITES illegal report data for 2022, issue another notification to the parties in early 2024, and prepare an updated report for the Plants Committee's consideration at its 27th meeting. We also believe that the Secretariat should be asked to consult with the IUCN SSC, Cactus and Succulent Plant Specialist Group, and other relevant experts to assess the impact of the exemption on the conservation of the species. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci aux États-Unis.
Thank you, United States. Germany has the floor.
Thank you, Chair. We think that, agreeing with the USA, that current data and the time frame in which they have been gathered have not been suitable to enable us to come to conclusions about impacts of the amendment to annotation #4 now. We also agree with indications from parties' responses that impacts of the COVID pandemic hamper interpretation and comparability of trade data from the last years with regard to possible impacts of the changes made to annotation #4. And we therefore suggest to suspend the assessment now and to postpone this topic and set a longer time frame that is more suitable for such a study or for such assessments, and to review potential impacts later, maybe including some kind of a report or a study of whether the announced conservation measures or management measures by South Africa have impacts or help to conserve the species. Thanks.
Merci.
Thank you, Germany. The United Kingdom has the floor.
Thank you, Chair. The UK supports the recommendations made by the USA. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, the United Kingdom. Canada, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Canada carefully reviewed the information compiled under decisions 18.323 and 18.324 and agree that there has been insufficient time to record accurately any effect of the exemption of finished products in paragraph F of annotation #4. The effects of the pandemic on normal patterns of trade in aloe ferox and most other medicinal commodities has also had a significant impact. As such, Canada agrees with the proposed suggestions from the United States in terms of how to continue this evaluation and would support their recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Merci, Canada.
Thank you, Canada.
Des demandes de parole des observateurs.
Would any observers like to take the floor on this item?
Membres du comité.
Committee members, could I ask you what you make of the US proposals supported by a number of parties? Oceania, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. I would say that those proposals make sense. We haven't had enough time to consider the trade patterns, particularly as a result of COVID-19 disruptions. Thank you, Chair.
Merci.
Thank you, Oceania. The Plants Committee takes note of the document while agreeing the US proposals other than any with financial implications. Are you happy with that? Thank you.
Donc,
well, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this morning's agenda. I would suggest that we move on to the in-session documents, that is to say, the executive summaries. We have some 1 and some 2. Let the Secretariat introduce them.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Donc, les deux.
Thank you, Madam Chair. These 2 documents have been online since yesterday, and I hope you've had time to consider them. We have spotted a mistake. The name of the representative for Asia is wrong, and we will be correcting that throughout the 2 sum documents. Canada has also pointed out that we got Canada wrong in French, saying la instead of le. We will correct the text. Thank you.
Donc,
So the floor is open if you have any comments on the 2 documents that Elena has presented. United States.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The United States does not have any comments to the summary record Sum 1. We did, however, have a couple of comments with regard to record PC 26 Sum 2. So the first one is under Agenda Item 30, and it's to clarify that the point we had made with regard to the terms of reference for the proposed study, paragraph A, was seeking to clarify what would constitute a potential concern based on an analysis of the trade data. So we had said, for example, would that be a shift from wild to art prop or a trade shift across range states or something else? So we were not seeking clarification on what was meant by potential fluctuations and shifts in trade patterns, but rather on what would constitute a potential concern based on the analysis of the trade data. We also have an edit with regard to Agenda Item 37. Under D, it should read, meets the guidance and principles. So add the words guidance and in front of principles there. And that's our comments. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci. États-Unis.
I thank the United States. Do we have any other requests? Canada.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm making reference to sum 1, agenda item 16 on the review of significant trade. I do not have an edit to propose, but I note under 16.1 that the committee noted document PC 26, Doc 16.1. In the discussion of Doc 16.1, the North American region included a proposal for additional input to be sought following the meetings of the Animals and Plants Committee. I am just seeking your confirmation that the summary record that will be prepared later will include some of the commentary that we provided. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you, Canada. Mexico.
Gracias, señora presidenta.
Thank you. I'm referring to sum 1. And I think under item 3, in the Spanish version, there is a translation error where it says that the committee notes that its rules of procedure as amended at the 26th meeting, Geneva 23, is still valid for this meeting. So it's it makes it sound as though the amendments that we made here are those. So it would be good to ensure that it refers to the right number of meeting and date. It's just a translation error. And it also seems to us that under item 10, and I'd like to ask my colleagues from North America to look at this. It's, I think, also the representative of North America region was also nominated for this subject. The committee agreed to nominate the representatives from Asia, Ms. Yan, and from North America, Mr. Bond. So I think that's something that should be added. And under 16.1, there is no mention of North America region's request for a publication of a second notification to provide more time to review the database. So I wonder if the Secretariat, if that is the case, it should say the committee notes document PC 26.16.1 and requests the Secretariat to issue a second notification for providing inputs to the tracking systems and users' guides. That is all for this document, sum 1. And if you would allow me, I'm just going to double check sum 2. Did we have in sum 2? Under item 32, the Spanish version, in the Spanish version it says that the committee established a working group, and it should say the Plants Committee, not the Standing Committee. And under 37, Mexico did send its input on the 7th of June, and when it says it invites Mexico to provide these inputs, that doesn't make sense because they've already been sent. Thank you. That's all.
Merci.
I thank you. On item 10, I had announced that we had a Plants Committee meeting on the organisation and allocation of the leads. And at that point, the representative of Asia confirmed her participation in that working group. So she remained the only representative, but I'll give the floor to the representative of North America region to confirm that he is no longer co-lead for that item. You have the floor, sir.
Région Amérique du Nord.
Yes, I do recollect that at the meeting of the Plants Committee. Interestingly, I have in my notes that I may have, during the plenary, offered to also be part of the working group, however. So I could be part of the working group, despite not being a co-lead, but I'm flexible. Thank you.
Merci.
Thank you. Do we have any other requests for the floor? African region.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a comment on someone. I think we do both, Sum 1 and 2, isn't it? So for Sum 2, Agenda 18, the records noted there, I cannot see what is the actual conclusion, maybe, when we say a notification to the parties to refer any feedback on document PC 26.18 to EU. Maybe it could be more clearly to see what was deliberated. Because currently what we can see here, it does not give a direction. So maybe to say what the Secretariat should present to EU as a feedback from the Agenda 18. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci.
I thank the representative of the African region, and I give the floor to the Secretariat for further clarification on your concern.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you also to the representative of Africa for raising this. Just to clarify that the summary record, this is just the agreements from the plenary, but after the summary records are adopted, once the executive summaries are adopted, a summary record will be produced, which will reflect the substance of the discussions. So that addresses what are the details that seem to be missing here. And regarding the conclusion of this item, the steps that will be taken is that in addition to noting the document, the Plans Committee invited the Secretariat to publish a notification. And in that notification, the Secretariat will invite parties to provide feedback directly to the European Union on document PC26 Doc 18. So that notification, through that notification, parties can directly liaise with the European Union, making sure that they convey their feedback directly to the EU, as they are the authors of that document. I hope that clarifies.
Malaisie, vous avez la...
Malaysia, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to extend a little bit of what the representative of Africa has raised regarding Agenda 18. Just to clarify, I think if I recall, most of the feedbacks that we heard during the meeting was a negative feedback to the proposal. If I can recall correctly, I might be wrong. So are we expected to give our feedback directly to EU? So what is the output of the discussion of this meeting in that sense? Because now we give the feedback directly to the EU, and what would be the conclusion of this meeting then on the proposal? Maybe that can be clarified. Thank you.
Je vais donner la parole à...
I shall give the floor to the European Union, and then we will reply. European Union.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think there is a constant misunderstanding of the document. The document did not contain any proposal. It contained a contribution to the discussion, and it welcomed any feedback. And therefore, we believe that we have heard feedback, and we are also happy to receive more feedback via notification. That is fine, but it's not a proposal, and if you read the recommendations, you can read that. So it's important to clarify that, and therefore I believe it's not, I mean, I'll be happy with any feedback from this, from the Plants Committee, but what we heard was that it would not, parties would not even like to take note. So if it's not noted, then I think it's hard to make a comment. Therefore, we believe that what is written there is fine, and it gives every party a chance to give its feedback in written form if they prefer to the EU. Thank you very much.
On va écouter le Canada.
We shall listen to Canada now.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the comments. So our understanding, so as Canada, we believe that the executive summary does accurately reflect the conclusion that you provided, Chair, during the discussion of this matter. And as the EU noted in their comments, this wasn't a proposal that was requesting a particular recommendation. So we, in Canada, do believe that the concerns that were raised were noted, and that the feedback can then be provided to the EU. So, Chair, we think that, just to wrap that up, we do think that the executive summary does accurately reflect what was discussed and the conclusion that was agreed to by the committee. Thank you.
Merci. On écoute.
Thank you. We will now hear the DRC. Thank you, Madam Chair. There was a great deal of discussion on this item, but I have the impression that it's a little unclear on the way in which this is presented. There's a mention of concerns, but there were many concerns, and it was not, the document was not noted. We had delegates who did not note the document, and I think there were also statements. And my country made a statement. It's not mentioned that a statement was made from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I requested that it appear in the minutes as a whole. I don't know where it's going to appear. Will it be here, or will there be another document that will show it? So I would like to be enlightened on that by the Secretariat. Thank you, DRC. At the beginning of the meeting, we explained that we will present an executive summary of meetings which only covers the decisions and the minutes, which is going to be produced at the end, and this will be published later, and your statement will be noted. But for further clarification, it will appear in the records, but I will ask the Secretariat to provide us with more information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm just going to quite simply go back to the rules of procedure, if I find the right, there you go. Rule 18, a concise executive summary of the decisions of a committee shall be prepared by the Secretariat for endorsement by the committee before the closure of a meeting. However, the executive summary of the last day of each meeting shall be sent by email to the members and acting members for endorsement after the meeting. The decisions of the committee shall come into effect upon endorsement of the executive summary in which they are contained. So what we're looking at right now is the executive summary, which is a concise executive summary of the decisions. This is what you are considering right now. Then if you look at paragraph 2 of that Rule 18, it says a consolidated summary record of each meeting shall be prepared in the 3 working languages by the Secretariat and made available on the CITES website within 40 days. This shall be presented in the order of the agenda and comprise 3 parts for each agenda item. A short statement indicating the main points of the discussion, the text indicating the decision that was made as it appears in the executive summary, and the text of any statement provided by any member, acting member, alternate member, of the observer from any party that was read into the record during the meeting. So this is exactly the declaration that the Democratic Republic of the Congo is referring to. It should go into the summary record. I would just like to draw back to your attention. It's paragraph 2 of Rule 18. The participants in the debate should also be included at the end of each topic. So it will basically list who said, who intervened during that agenda item. So it will be posted on the website. The parties will have 20 days to comment on it. So the Secretariat shall take into account the comments received within 20 days of the circulation. And upon approval of the chair of the committee, the Secretariat shall make the final summary record available on the website of the convention. So that just basically explains the process. It's Rule 18 of the Rules of Procedure. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Merci, Secretariat.
I thank the Secretariat for that clarification. Do we have Any further requests for the floor or comments on Portugal? You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a matter of linguistic in this document, and I've been checking on version in Spanish and in English, and the Spanish version refers to the concerns raised by the document, while the English version says about the concerns raised on the document. On the document, there is no raise of concerns. It's about the document, I believe. Maybe it could be clarified in the English version. Thank you.
Okay. Je donne la parole.
I'm going to give the floor to the representative of the African region, then Canada, then the DRC.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. I think we've already spoken, and I'd like to come back on what my colleague from DRC said. It was subject of several discussions, and when we look at most cases overall, the document was not welcomed favorably overall. It was more or less rejected when we look at the points of view we heard from various people that day. Because if we look at the feedback from the various parties and countries, in general, there wasn't a consensus, a favorable consensus. But in the English version, my English is not good, but when we say feedback, concerns from the document, I would prefer to see. There were a lot of concerns when the document was presented, and I really would have that when we talk about the feedback, we need to say clearly that the document was not favourably welcomed by the majority of the parties. Thank you. Thank you to Africa. Now I give the floor to Canada.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies for taking the floor again. We are referring actually to the same comment made by the colleague from Portugal regarding the French translation. So the French translation of this item on the executive summary reads, Le comité prend note des inquiétudes soulevées dans le document, mais nous pensons que le mot dans doit être...
We think the word dont in the French version should be replaced by the word concerning. Thank you.
Merci, Canada.
Thank you, Canada. DRC.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the representative for Africa has seen what I was looking. If we look at the conclusions of the European Union in their document, the committee was asked to take note, but the reaction to that request was clear because of the discussions, no one took note. So the summary should say and reflect clearly what was said during the discussions. The committee does not take note. And if we could add to there, and it was requested that additional information be sent to the European Union, because if we leave it like that, the additional information that will be sent will come back into the discussion, into the item of the discussion. That's not what happened. The request of the European Union was that we take note, and in the statements, no one took note. So that's why we would like this clarification to be reflected in the summary record. We do not, that the committee does not take note. Thank you. I thank the DRC.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. The document that we have before us, PC 26, Sum 2, reflects the decision on which we agreed. I read out the decision. So the problem that we might have has to do with the translation that we have. The English text does reflect what happened. That I noted the concerns raised on document PC 26, Doc 18, and we agreed that language together. Now, everything that was said during the meeting on this item will appear in the record, and there will be a clear account given of all of the statements made. And that summary record will show what was said in this room. And I would remind you that with respect to the EU document, it was not a matter of taking note of the document. So we can't say we didn't take note because we weren't being invited to do so. I would point out, I'll give you the floor, but it's past noon. So what we're going to do is check to see whether this language needs to be cleaned up. Concerns were noted about the document. Let me perhaps give the floor to France and then the United States, but please quickly, please be brief. Thank you, Madam. I would like to say that I agree with Canada. The English says...
Is the on document, PC 26, Doc 18.
The French version says prend note des documents, the concerns raised in the document. So I do think that the French version should say exprimer the concerns expressed or raised on the document. So there is a problem with the French version. Thank you. The United States, you have the floor?
No. D'accord.
You didn't? Okay, thank you. The DRC has the floor. Thank you. I'm sorry to keep coming back on this. Now, if you look at the EU document, there are recommendations, and the EU says the Plants Committee is invited to take note. That is what was said in document 18. Take note of the European Union's approach. And I do think that we should make it clear that this did not happen because of the concerns raised. So let me come back. I'm looking at the document that we discussed. We were asked to take note, and we didn't because of concerns raised. Thank you.
Ok. Donc la RDC, nous...
Thank you.
Nous allons...
We are going to refer to what was actually said during the meeting. We will see what conclusion was accepted by everybody and to which there was no objection. So there is actually a recording of the meeting that we can refer to, and the summary record of the meeting will reflect the whole debate and the exchange of views. It is 7 minutes past noon. We're going to go on until 10 past 12, and that's it. Mexico, did you want to contribute to this discussion? Thank you, Madam. I have a proposal that might help us deal with this. We could divide paragraph 18 into 3 paragraphs, and we can say the committee noted the concerns raised on the document 18, comma, and did not take note of document 2618, and invited the Secretariat to publish a notification. So we could have, first of all, noted the concerns, and then secondly, did not take note of the document, which was what was mentioned in the original document in 11A, and then invited the Secretariat to publish a notification. That might help us get out of this problem. Thank you. We're going to listen to the recording of the meeting. That's why we ask you to please make sure that you are paying attention when conclusions are agreed at the end of our discussion on every agenda item. There was a conclusion and nobody then reacted, said, hey, the text says take note, we don't want to take note, because I do recall there was a lengthy discussion before we came up with the conclusion proposed, and at the time there was no reaction, there was no objection. To the conclusion is what I'm saying, says the chair. There was no objection to the conclusion of our discussions. I'm not saying there weren't adverse reactions to the text. I am referring to the conclusion, the way I summed up our debate, if you like. So we're going to go back to the recordings and give you a word-for-word account of what was said then. Okay, it's 10 past 12. We will reconvene here at 2. We have an NDF side event lined up. The chair kindly thanks the interpreters for their time. It's very hard not to overrun. We all get so caught up in things. Thank you.